What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from SBMTG on the YouTube.com. Down there, we like magic, and I got a question for you. Have you ever wanted to play a deck with 26 rares in it? Well, today, I'm going to help you run down that dream with $10 mono blue junk rares. Well, this is essentially a mono blue mid-range deck, and we've got a little bit of everything, believe it or not. We've got big flying threats, we've got some decent removal, and we've got some straight counter spells too. So this deck actually isn't half bad, to be honest with you, so let's check it out. We'll talk creatures first. We're playing 16 of them, and blue actually has a bunch of rare creatures that are only like a quarter apiece, and are just a hair away from being standard playable. They're all fairly strong, they just haven't had their moment in the sun, and a lot of them are really fun to play with too. Starting, of course, with Wharf Infiltrator. You gotta play this guy. A real talk, this guy's actually super sweet. Just 2 mana for a 1/1 that's incredibly hard to block, really, really hard for them to block. And every time it does get in for combat damage, you get to loot. If there was nothing else written on the card, that'd be fine. We've seen cards like that in the past, and people have really liked them. So, card is already kind of fine, but if we got a couple of extra mana, then whenever we discard a creature, we get to pay the 2 and get a 3/2 guy. That's not bad. If you get a creature or 2 worth of value out of this, you've done really well. Even if you just get 1 guy out of it, then you've essentially gotten 4 power out of 4 mana, you've drawn a card. That's, none of that is bad. And really, you don't even have to make Eldrazi to feel like you've gotten decent value out of this guy. If he draws you just 2 cards, even if you have to discard, if he draws you a couple of cards over the course of the game and does a couple of damage, then he's done his job. For just 2 mana, that's not bad at all. And we get to play some small-scale synergy with the discard part of his loot effect in this deck too. Just this guy facilitates a lot for us. He's an early game creature that draws us cards. 2 mana for a thing that is hard to block and loots. That sounds kind of like Smuggler's Copter to me. It's not. It's obviously not Smuggler's Copter, but still, 2 mana, hard to block, loots. That Smuggler's Copter was banned because it was so good. So just think about that. Next creature we're going to play is a whole playset of Nibilis of Frost, because this guy has always been better than people give him credit for, and people give him credit for it, honestly. I see people in my comment section all the time telling me how good Nibilis of Frost is, and they're absolutely right. The card is fantastic. We have 16 different instants or sorceries that this guy can tap down creatures with, and he prowesses too. 4 mana for a 3/3 flying prowess is not actually a terrible deal in and of itself, but when you get these kind of crazy tempo plays off of it, this is basically pseudo removal on a stick that flies. It's just so good. That is really good. What's bad about that? I'm also going to play a playset of Curator of Mysteries in the deck, and yeah, I know it's a 4-drop too. We're playing 8 4-drops, but we can always cycle this for just 1 mana if we want to. Just the ability to draw a card for a mana is really nice some of the time, but if we just hardcast it, it's a 4/4 flyer for 4. That's a fair deal too. And if we cycle other copies of it or Hieroglyphic Illumination, whatever, we'll be able to scry. That's just good. Solid body with evasion can help you get more scries or just draw you a card. All these things are super versatile for just a quarter a piece. Curator of Mysteries really breaks the bank at 40 cents. We're actually going to play some 5-drops here, definitely. I'm going to play 3 copies of Glyph Keeper. In the deck, and there are other 5-drops that you could play that are blue junk rares, but I think this is definitely the best. Glyph Keeper is he's impressive on paper. This card is actually pretty good. If we didn't have some better options at more expensive costs, then we probably would just play Glyph Keeper. I'm not saying that he's definitely standard playable or anything. The 3 toughness does kind of hurt, but the fact that he can come back a little later in the game and he's already hard to deal with to begin with is just really good, and you've still got a 5 power flyer in the air no matter what his toughness is. So this is actually excellent, and if he does die at any point, you can just bring him back when you've got a more advantageous board state. Or maybe you just want to block something else. This guy can block and trade with a Heart of Kieran early game, or mid game at least. And then later on, come back. They don't get their Heart of Kieran back. You get your giant flying sphinx back. Not to mention, they're never going to Fatal Push him. That's more or less, that's impossible. He's resilient to every other removal in the entire format. Any targeted removal, this guy just shrugs off at least once. They're going to have to 2-for-1 themselves to kill this guy, and then he comes back. That's ridiculous. Just in Magic theory, that's crazy. Glyph Keeper is really good, I promise. And we'll finish off the creatures with just a 1-of Geralf's Masterpiece, because I want to do it. We could play a 4th Glyph Keeper in this slot if we wanted to, but I just really like Geralf's Masterpiece. I hate that it never really got the time to shine. It doesn't look like it's going to get any time to shine. But, I mean, late game, we can always bring this back if we want to. You know, sometimes he can be a huge flyer. Yet another huge flyer. That's cool. And this and Glyph Keeper both synergize a little bit with Wharf Infiltrator, you know. We have to discard cards for that, so you can discard a Glyph Keeper, bring it back with Embalm later on in the game, or discard a Drow's Masterpiece, get it back for just 4 mana. That's not bad. We're going to look at a common here that's way better than any of the rares we've seen so far, and that's the 3 copies of Negate. Negate might legit be the best card in the deck. That's just all there is to it. It's definitely seen more competitive play than like any other card in the entire deck. It's just fantastic right now, especially, you know, counters Heart of Kiran when you're on the play, and they're playing it on their turn too. And it counters Aetherworks Marvel, which is really super important if you haven't caught that. If you haven't followed this format so far. Countering Aetherworks Marvel is really stupid important, so awesome that we're packing some Negate to do that. And, you know, it counters Planeswalkers and stuff too, enchantments that you'll randomly encounter, so artifacts and such. Just a sort of catch-all for everything but creatures, but that's okay, because creatures are not played as often as they usually are in the current format. That being said, though, still going to pack 1 copy of Essence Scatter. I'm going to do it. Slightly contradict myself here. I think it's still worth playing 1 copy of Essence Scatter, you know, whether we get it turn 2 or we're holding on to it turn 5. It's still a really effective just 2 mana catch-all for literally everything that has a power and toughness and isn't name Prowling Serpapart. So that's pretty sweet right there. Definitely want to pack at least the 1 copy. On the card advantage end of things, I'm going to play 2 copies of Anticipate right here to start things off. Yet another great common that's better than some of the rares we're playing as far as in terms of the amount of play that it's actually seeing, you know. Anticipate is just a pretty decent utility card, you know. It's great card selection, instant speed, only costs the 2 mana, allows you to dig for counter spells at instant speed while the thing you're trying to counter is still on the stack. All of that's important, so I think a couple of copies is in order. It's just a solid card. To finish off the non-rare cards in the deck, we're going to play 4 copies of Hieroglyphic Illumination, which I don't necessarily think is better than Glimmer of Genius, but we don't have anything to synergize with the energy from Glimmer. In this deck, we do have Curator of Mysteries to synergize with the Scry, though, so I'll go with Illumination. And I also like the theory, I have seen this around in articles recently, that playing Hieroglyphic Illumination over Glimmer allows you to play fewer lands. And I've seen people playing like 23 lands in control decks because of Hieroglyphic Illumination. I don't want to go that far, but I do think that playing Curator and Hieroglyphic Illuminations allows us to cut a land or 2 in this deck. And I do really, really like that about it. I like that it's good at any stage of the game, whether it's generating card advantage or you're just like digging for a counterspell with it or something. Just, you'll always have a use for Illumination. Solid card. Back to the rares. I'm going to play 4 copies of Scatter to the Winds in this deck because, you know, it's a junk rare. You know, you could play Void Shatter, but I'm pretty sure Void Shatter is 3 times as expensive as this card is. And if you did have Void Shatter or Disallow, you'd just play those anyway. That's a quick upgrade tip there, but Scatter to the Winds is still fine, you know. It's cancel at its absolute lowest, and that's not god-awful, you know, it's fine. And sometimes it'll get you a creature, which is very much welcome. Like, Scatter to the Winds is probably the worst somewhat playable 3-mana counterspell, but that doesn't mean it's unplayable. Card is still fine for our purposes here. And finally, this is just common sense, but this can counter Aetherworks Marvel, whether you're on the play or the draw, and that's just super important. Like, this card gets some points just for being able to do that. I'm going to play 4 copies of Imprisoned in the Moon in this deck? Yes! Heck yes! I'll play 4 copies of this. This is unconditional removal for creatures, planeswalkers, and even, like, the odd Westvale Abbey sometimes. Like, that situation will come into play occasionally. So just, like, yeah, yes, I will take Blue Oblivion Ring almost any day, you know. And to finish off the main here, I'm going to play 2 copies of Welcome to the Fold in the deck. Probably been a while since you've seen this card, right? Well, this synergizes with Wharf Infiltrator, but it's fine even if we're not discarding it. This actually has a fairly wide spread of targets in the format right now, especially against creature-based decks. You're going to be able to nab something a lot of the time with just a hard cast Welcome to the Fold. But if you can cast it off of a Wharf Infiltrator that you've gotten through, that can sometimes be really good, especially later on in the game. If you can get through with an Infiltrator on turn 5 or 6 and you can pump some real mana into this, Welcome to the Fold is a really dirty card. Here are your lands, right here. There's 24 islands. 24 of them. I just don't really see any need to play any other kind of... I mean, we could play like Blighted Cataract, I guess. There's other things we could play, you know, if you wanted to. You could do like a whole colorless land suite, but I don't see the reason to get that complicated. Let's just play 24 islands and be as consistent as possible. Here's your sideboard right here. We're mostly going to expand on our ability to counter spells. We're going to play 4 Ceremonious Rejection. It's one of the more important things we can play in the board for just 1 mana, so whether we're on the play or the draw, that's important. We can counter Scrap Heap Scrounger, and we can counter Heart of Kieran. Those are important things to be able to do. And obviously, again, with the Aetherworks Marvel, we can counter that for just 1 mana. So, really important card. I think Rejection is right now. We'll play the whole playset of that. Dispel and Negate are in there. Just, Dispel protects our guys. Whatever, it's fine. I don't see why we wouldn't play at least a couple of copies of it. It's important to protect our dudes against all the removal in the format right now. And then Negate is in there because Negate is just probably, again, the best card in the entire deck. And to finish off the sideboard counterspell suite, there's a lot of them. Sorry about that. We're going to play 1 copy of Essence Scatter just against creature-based decks. That seems pretty self-explanatory. Also against aggro strategies, we'll play 2 copies of Welcome to the Fold. Go ahead and make it a play set. And then we'll play 3 copies of Compelling Deterrence, which can sometimes be, it's really good tempo. It's good at basically getting anything back in their hand. It doesn't have to just be a creature. It can be anything. And sometimes if we've got a masterpiece in play, we can get a little zombie synergy off of it too. So I like Deterrence in this deck. And it could make the main board in some ways. Just having an all-purpose bounce spell is nice in mono blue decks. And then finally, we'll play 2 copies of Anticipate against other control decks. So we can take out some of this removal and focus more on winning the card advantage war. But I will say, before I move on from the sideboard here, if you had a couple of extra bucks, I like Engulf the Shore, which is still like only $1. But I didn't want to play anything above 50 cents in this deck. I wouldn't call Engulf a junk rare. It's definitely seen some play. And then also Sphinx of the Final Word, which I was ready to really want to include in this deck. I know it's always been like $1, $1.25, but now it's shot up to like $3.75 on TCG Player, which is a lot. It's because of the New Perspectives deck, but I think that's a little too expensive to want to play in this. But if you already have a copy or 2 of it, it's phenomenal against control. You should play it. And here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 56, which is pretty good for a $10 deck. And I'm here to tell you, the deck is not terrible, honestly. Again, just run through this one more time. We've got a bunch of counterspells main deck, which is super relevant against some of the important strategies in the format right now. We have got a boatload of really high-powered flying creatures, like at least 4 power. And Nibilis can become 4 power pretty easily too. So we've got a lot of pretty high-powered flyers in the deck, and that's pretty good in this format. Like, our threats are very, very real in this deck. Plus, we've got some card advantage too. We've got solid removal in Imprisoned in the Moon. Like, as far as, again, just like, deck building theory, this deck is fairly well put together. It's got a little bit of everything. Decent threats, card advantage, a little bit of removal, and counter magic. Like, I feel like the deck is actually fairly well-rounded for only $10, and you get to play 26 rares in the main. And let me put it another way, actually. I want to say a little bit more about this deck. Against aggro decks, especially decks like zombies, we've got flyers to really give them some problems. Against mid-range decks and combo decks, we've got counter spells. They hate those. Turns out, against control decks, we've not only got some things to do card advantage and win counterspell wars, but we've also got recursible creatures like Geralf's Masterpiece and Glyph Keeper. So we've got a little bit of something for everybody in this deck, and especially at the local level, I want you guys to try this out. For only $10 off TCG Player, this is actually like a decent investment for an F&M. You learn to play this deck, you can do pretty decent stuff with it. But I'm tapped out for now. That's all we got for this one. Really interested in how you guys felt about this one and what else we could play. Blue has a bunch of good junk rares, like quote-unquote junk rares. Maybe rares that never got quite a chance, and they're actually better than people give them credit for. Blue has a bunch of those that I didn't even play, and every color does, which is making me wonder, if you guys enjoyed this video, if you'd be interested in seeing me do this with every color. I'd be interested in that thought experiment. This was a fun thought experiment this time, to limit myself to $10, $15 and just try to build the best thing we could. And I feel like we actually put together something that can do some work for you. So I'd be interested in exploring this concept in all the other colors. So let me know if you're into that. But if you liked the video, make sure you like the video. Clicking thumbs up puts it in more people's recommended feeds, which helps me a butt ton. So please help me out doing that. You can also go to the Patreon, patreon.com/SBMTG. You don't have to donate anything, but if you donate $1, then I'll tell you what the next deck tech is every day, like 12 to 24 hours before I actually upload the video. So that's kind of cool. That's an incentive. and do all the other stuff, you know. You can follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev. Sub to the channel. Make sure you're new because we are already getting Hour of Devastation leaks, and you don't want to miss any of those, you know. Wizards actually leaked some cards themselves today, and Nicol Bolas is among them, so check that out. Just put a video out on that late last night, so link in the description of that. If you haven't seen the leaks yet, or you just want to see me talk about them, make sure you click that. But in any case, I am Dev from SBMTG. As usual, thanks for watching, my wizards.